All right, chat. So, we got Kamala Harris to basically concede the election. This is something that after election night and how it played out, a lot of people were expecting her to make some kind of statement that night. She ended up not doing that, but she did make a statement the next day where she conceded the election. And this was rough to look at. But I do want to take a look at this, and I also want to give some thoughts on what I think went wrong with Kamala Harris's campaign. So without further ado, enough dilly-dallying. Let's just jump into it. Here we go. Mo in the chat says, I wish she said something like, I hope I am wrong, but if Trump gets bad, we will fight for our rights. Yeah, it would have been nice. I'll say this. I've already seen the speech, and I think for the most part, it was a pretty good speech. She didn't do the Trump thing of crying about how the election was rigged or unfair or anything like that. She conceded like a true professional, and overall, for the most part, I think it was a pretty good speech. But yeah, I'm sure there's areas where she could have done better.
Good.
Damn, I don't know why, but all of a sudden I want to cry. Yeah, I mean, like, I know a lot of people on like the right, they look at like a lot of us getting like really fucking emotional and they think it's like cringe or like, they poke fun at it or whatever. And like, they don't understand because like they don't care about a lot of the things that we care about, like LGBTQ rights, things like, for example, trans people's access to like trans healthcare and stuff. They don't see that as that big of an issue. Whereas like, as somebody who has a lot of friends who are trans, that's something that's very fucking important to me because those are people who are literally going to have their rights stripped away. Then I think about, obviously I was born in this country, but as somebody who has like Latino heritage, I have relatives who immigrated into this country. And so that's an issue that matters a lot to me. And I think about all the families that are about to be ripped apart now and how much pain that's going to cause those people. That's something that really like emotionally affects someone like me. And I think about like all the women who are dying now because they don't have access to abortion for like legitimate medical purposes where they need to have an abortion. We talked about this in the last segment, but like a lot of conservatives will have you believe that any woman that's fighting for abortion rights, they just want to be someone who can sleep around without using protection. And anytime they get knocked up, they're just going to abort it and quote, kill a baby. And the thing is like, that's not the only reason people use abortion. Okay. Not everybody who wants to have an abortion is some, I'm using their words, not mine, some slut who just wants to get knocked up and kill babies left and right. Like, that's not like the case for everyone. We talked about the example in the last segment of ectopic pregnancy. Sorry, that's a really hard word for me to say. But like, that's a case where you need an abortion or the mother will die. And we are seeing women dying now in states where abortions are banned. Okay. So when I think about trans people losing access to their health care, when I think about families being ripped apart because of mass immigration that Donald Trump wants to do, when I think about women dying needlessly because their rights to take care of their own bodies are being stripped away, these are things that matter to me. These are the things that cause a lot of us to be extremely emotional about our fellow man. So when I see a lot of these like right-wingers that like will mock someone on the left for getting emotional, it's because you don't give a fuck about these people, and we do. That's why this fucking matters to us. That's why this is so important to us, and that's why we're so devastated by this loss. That's why. Because we care about people, unlike some of you freaks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So let me say, and I love you back. And I love you back. So let me say, my heart is full today. My heart is full today, full of gratitude for the trust you have placed in me, full of love for our country, and full of resolve. The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright. As long as we never give up and as long as we keep fighting. To my beloved Doug and our family, I love you so very much. To President Biden and Dr. Biden, thank you for your faith and support. To Governor Walz and the Walz family, I know your service to our nation will continue.
I've seen some people, and we're going to kind of like, as we go through this reaction, I'll kind of chime in with some of my thoughts on some of the things that people are saying on social media and stuff. I've seen some people making like the argument that like, you know, the reason she lost is because she's, you know, a black woman or whatever. And it was like a racism thing combined with like a misogyny thing. And while I think that for a very small number of voters, like that might have been a factor, they just, for whatever reason, whether it's like misogyny or they don't think a woman's capable or, you know, whatever the fuck stupid reason you can come up with, maybe that was a very small factor. I don't think that was like the biggest factor though. I think that something like, you know, the fumble of like running Joe Biden again when he clearly wasn't fit to run again, and like that resulting in a lot of loss in faith in the Democratic Party, could have been, you know, a bigger contributor than the fact that she was a black woman or anything like that. Having said that, I don't think that that's the main issue. We'll get into a little bit later what I think the main issue is, but yeah, I've seen some people saying that, oh, she probably lost because she's a woman or because she's like a black woman or whatever. And while I think that racism and misogyny is still very much a problem in this country, I don't think that that was as big of a factor as some people seem to think.
Continue. And to my extraordinary team, to the volunteers who gave so much.
I love her. This is hard to watch after 7 months of activism on Twitter. Literally got ad share on 2 accounts pushing content for her. Yeah, it is really fucking depressing. I talked about this throughout like pretty much the whole election season that, you know, I hadn't seen this much excitement around a candidate since Barack Obama. So like it's really truly sad to see this outcome. But I do think some mistakes were made. And I think if the Democrats play their cards right, they can learn some valuable lessons from this. We'll see, though. The next time around in 4 years, we'll see.
Of themselves, to the poll workers and the local election officials, I thank you. I thank you all. Look, I am so proud of the race we ran and the way we ran it. And the way we ran it over the 107 days of this campaign, we have been intentional about building community and building coalitions, bringing people.
A lot of people said they just voted on food and fuel prices, and Kamala's campaign didn't really address any of those concerns. Yeah, I have some thoughts about that. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you're kind of like, you're venturing into the same like idea that I had.
Together from every walk of life and background, united by love of country with enthusiasm and joy in our fight for America's future. And we did it with the knowledge that we all have so much more in common than what separates us.
Triangle Jade in the chat says, I've been fighting my whole life. I don't have any more fight left in me. It's why I'm leaving. I know it sounds cowardice, but I literally can't anymore. And earlier in the chat, I saw you mention that, like, you're interested in, like, leaving this country. Obviously, you know, especially for, you know, trans folk like yourself, like, you guys have to do what's best for you. There are a lot of people with a lot of power in this country, unfortunately, who are trying to strip your rights away. So I think that, you know, as, you know, queer communities, we need to kind of, like, you know, work together to help a lot of you, you know, trans folks get by, you know, whether it's like helping you move to a state where, like, things like gender affirming care are still available to you and still accessible to you, or helping you move to another country that's like a safe haven for trans people, you know, whatever the case may be. That's going to be the goal of a lot of online queer communities, or not even just online, but like IRL queer communities as well, moving forward, is trying to help, you know, their fellow LGBTQ people, find access to the resources that they need moving forward. That's going to be the most important thing over the course of the next 4 years.
Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today,
What, Kamala? We're not gonna show up on, you know, the day that they certify the election, and we're not gonna, like, storm the Capitol. We're not gonna do that. Oh, that's right. It's because we're not a bunch of unhinged fucking freaks. As much as this loss sucks, this is the way you handle the loss. Like a professional. Not like some fucking loser sipping Diet Coke while all your supporters fucking storm the Capitol and try to overthrow the government in favor of you. Like, that was ridiculous.
I spoke with President-elect Trump.
That's one of the reasons I still don't understand why anybody... Just, even if you were to cut out every other stupid fucking thing Trump did, he tried to overthrow our government. This democratic process that so many Americans say they care so much about, he literally tried to violate that process. Invalidate it, make it null and void, and you still voted for him? What the fuck?
Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah.
A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it.
Well, it says, this is why I'm disappointed in the human race. If this happened during Nixon, 50 states would have been blue. Seeing this is depressing. I just don't understand. After how much he fucked up his last term, and after how much division he's caused in this country, after all the dumb shit he said while, you know, running for this current campaign, and just I just can't stop pointing to it. J6 alone. Why would you vote for that man again?
At the same time, in our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States. And loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people. A fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation. the ideals that reflect America at our best. That is a fight I will never give up.
I do also think that one thing I will agree with is I've seen some people on social media talk about the fact that, you know, because of the Biden dropout and because of how limited the time was that she had to campaign, I do think to some degree that was a factor in like the potential loss. I don't think it's the biggest factor, to be clear, but I do think that to some degree that was a substantial factor. You know, they didn't have a lot of planning in terms of how they wanted to run this campaign. So yeah, I do think that somewhat contributed to it. I don't think it's as big of a contributor as some people think, though.
I will never give up the fight for a future where Americans can pursue their dreams, ambitions, and aspirations. Where the
Going back to Gavin Newsome, did you watch the debate he did with DeSantis? No, but I want to see that now. If you have access to that, you should drop that into reactions. We can take a look at that on a future stream. That might be interesting.
women of America have the freedom to make decisions about their own body and not have their government telling them what to do. We will never give up the fight to protect our schools and our streets from gun violence. And America, we will never give up the fight for our democracy, for the rule of law, for equal justice, and for the sacred idea that every one of us, no matter who we are or where we start out, has certain fundamental rights and freedoms that must be respected and upheld. And we will continue to wage this fight in the voting booth, in the courts, and in the public square. And we will also wage it in quieter ways, in how we live our lives, by treating one another with kindness and respect.
That's what I'm talking about with like community aid right now for like all the parties that are affected by a lot of these policies that Trump's going to be putting into place. You know, we're going to have to work really hard as a community to help people find access to these kind of resources. I don't necessarily know what that looks like, admittedly. I know that there are some other communities that are working really hard to help provide those kind of resources. So that's what this is going to look like for the next 4 years. If you happen to be, you know, a party that's affected by these policies, you know, a woman who needs access to an abortion, you know, for medical reasons or whatever the case may be, there's going to have to be people that are going to help you get access to that, whether it's transporting you to another state where it's legal or something like that. We'll see what that looks like. Or if you're someone who's trans and you live in a state that doesn't provide you access to the resources you need for your gender affirming care, we're going to have to find communities that will provide you ways to get access to that. It's going to be a tough 4 years, but I think that as long as, you know, a lot of these communities stand together in solidarity, I think we can get through it. It's not going to be easy. It's definitely not going to be easy, but we can get through it.
Looking in the face of a stranger and seeing a neighbor, by always using our strength to lift people up, to fight for the dignity that all people deserve. The fight for our freedom will take hard work, but like I always say, we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work can be joyful work. And the fight for our country is always worth it. It is always worth it. To the young people who are watching, it is... I love you guys. To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but please know it's going to be okay.
Imagine her concession speech being more unifying than his campaigning speeches. Yeah, it's crazy, right? If you look at any of his multiple campaign speeches that he's given leading up to the election, it's just so much division in the speeches. So much. But yeah, she's talking about unity. You know, he wants to talk about unity now that he's giving his victory speech and whatnot. But like, he didn't give a shit about any of that shit leading into the election.
On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power. And don't you ever listen when anyone tells you...
Miss Godas says, I think we will be okay. It won't be easy. I'll say this much. It will not be easy. But I think that as long as we stick together, as a community, like, other communities or whatever, as long as these communities stick together and work with each other to help each other get access to, the resources they need, I think in the end we'll be okay. It's going to be hard. There's no denying that. It's definitely going to be hard. But I think as long as we stick together, it'll be okay.
Something is impossible because it has never been done before. You have the capacity to do extraordinary good.
Yeah, exactly. As Neo Reloaded 90 in the chat says, power in numbers. This isn't the first time we had to stand resolute against hate. Absolutely.
In the world. And so to everyone who is watching, do not despair. This is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves. This is a time to organize, to mobilize, and to stay engaged for the sake of freedom and justice and the future that we all know we can build together. Look, many of you know I started out as a prosecutor, and throughout my career, I saw people at some of the worst times in their lives. People who had suffered great harm and great pain, and yet found within themselves the strength and the courage and the resolve to take the stand.
I actually think Kamala being more against, not being more against anti-trans sentiment was a mistake. She barely mentioned trans people, and those attack ads landed. Here's the thing. I obviously take serious issue that she wasn't more outspoken against a lot of the anti-trans policies that were being mentioned by the opposite side and a lot of the bigotry that was taking place. I take personal issue with a lot of her positions on that, obviously. The thing is that I don't think that swayed the needle as much as a lot of people in these online spaces think so. Because here's the thing. The average normie voter, I know this is like a taboo thing to say when you're in these online spaces, because we get really tunnel visioned about the issues that matter so much to us. Trans rights, women's rights, the environment. These are things that we get really tunnel visioned about as progressives, because these are things that matter a lot to us. And these are very important things, don't get me wrong. But you have to understand that the average American voter doesn't really think about these things. It's not that if you bring it to their attention, they won't care. I think that for, a decent amount of people in this country, if you brought attention to them, hey, trans people need access to this healthcare, and, the right wants to take that away from them, I think they would say, yeah, that's a pretty bad thing. These people should have the right to live their lives however you want. They may not understand the nuances of what, trans healthcare looks like. But if you tell them, hey, they need access to this healthcare and the right's trying to strip it away, I think that there's at least, a substantial amount of people who would say, okay, that sounds like a bad thing, and like I'm in favor of that not happening, right? Or if you talk about, the abortion issue and how it affects, people, not just, people who just want an abortion for, whatever reason they may choose, but also people who need it for medical reasons. I think if you explain that to them, a lot of people will think, yeah, that sounds like a really bad thing. So I think that, women should have access to abortion and whatnot. These are things that if you bring it to their attention, I think that they do care about these things. Having said that, the average American voter, the working class, they don't think about these things. I guess now is a good time to get into my thoughts on what went wrong in this election, is I don't think they said enough to appeal to the working class. I seen Bernie mention this, and I have a segment planned a little bit later. We'll cover that in some more detail. But I also saw like other people in the space also kind of agreeing with me on this position. Like Riverboat Jack put out a tweet recently talking about this. Biden stopped pro-worker messaging in 2022 and helped kill the $15 minimum wage. Harris didn't run a campaign for workers, and stagnant wages plus price gouging and inflation killed her support among voters. No, nothing liberals like Matthew Iglesias were the target of the Harris campaign. They got everything they wanted. It's why they say her campaign was perfect. But the people left out, the working class spine of the Democratic Party, were actively abandoned. This is the real issue with why the election was lost. Like I said, a lot of times, well, first off, I want to emphasize something that I kind of emphasized in the last segment we talked about. One of the goals that I have with this channel is to try and explain a lot of these political issues from a normie perspective. Not only making it easier for normies to understand, because the average normie tunes into something like a Bosch stream or a Destiny stream or a Riverboat Jack stream, or, like any of these like political commentators. You tune into one of these streams and your eyes start to glaze over because they start to use like a lot of complicated terminology you just don't understand. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So my goal with this channel is kind of try and cover some of these issues, but make it more understandable to the average normie. But also, I want to be able to take the perspective of the average normie and point it out to a lot of these people who get involved in these like online spaces, specifically online leftist spaces like we're a part of, right? And explain to you guys their perspective. This is what the average voter thinks about, right? And so when you're running a left-wing progressive campaign, yes, you can talk about things like trans rights. These are things that we think is very important, and we should talk about those things. Yes, we can talk about women's rights. This is a very important issue, and we should talk about those things. Yes, you can talk about the environment. Basically, like I can list any progressive cause that we think as progressives is important. And yes, when you're running for the presidency and you're campaigning for the issues that matter to you, you can put an emphasis on these things and how they're important. But in order to win elections, you have to appeal to the average everyday voter. Who is the average everyday voter? The working class. And the main thing that is on the minds of the working class is, what are you going to do to help my wallet? How are you going to lower my taxes? How are you going to make sure that I make more money at my day job? How are you going to help me put food on the table and a roof over the heads for my family? And the reality is, her campaign, Kamala's campaign, didn't do that enough. They didn't really chime in all that much on how they were going to improve the lives of the working class. And that's why people voted the way they did. Because while we can look at what Trump is saying about things like, oh, I'm going to, impose tariffs on foreign importers of goods so that they pay the taxes instead of you, and then I can lower your taxes. Or he's talking about, oh, I want to remove income tax and we'll just like cover those costs through the tariffs. For somebody who's a normie who doesn't know any better, that sounds great. Now, we can look at that and we can say, oh, tariffs are really bad, and here's why. And we can point out to people that that's going to result in even more inflation, and that's going to result in higher costs for goods because Americans consume a lot of imported goods. So that's going to make things cost even more for you. And we all know that removing something like income tax, as nice as that sounds on paper, we all know that that would be like a really bad thing, and that wouldn't solve the problems that he thinks tariffs alone are going to solve. And Kamala's campaign didn't do enough to explain that. Okay, we may know those things. We may know that when she says that, Donald Trump wants to charge a sales tax on goods, that she's referring to the tariffs. The average person doesn't know that. right? The average person isn't this knowledgeable. So you have to explain these things to them, and you have to explain how you're going to do it better. And they didn't do that. So when you're an average normie voter who's not as invested in these spaces as you and I are, right? And you're looking at this, you're like, well, what does Kamala say she's going to do to benefit my wallet so I can better provide for my family? Well, she's not really saying a whole lot. What is Donald Trump saying? Donald Trump's saying he wants to eliminate income tax and he wants to make foreign importers of goods pay the taxes instead. If you don't know any better, that sounds fucking great. So of course, the average normie voter who doesn't know any better, the undecided voter, they're going to vote for that guy because that's the person that is claiming that he's going to help their bottom line even more. I know that in these online spaces, we get so tunnel visioned on the issues that matter to us, and those issues are important. But if you really want to win elections, this is how you win them. You appeal to the working class. The working class is what the Democrats are supposed to be appealing to. That's like their core voter base. And they dropped the ball this time around. That's why we lost. That's why we lost. There wasn't enough attempts to appeal to the core voter base, the working American. And there wasn't enough attempts to explain why Trump's positions on this aren't good for the country. That's why we lost. But anyway, let's finish the speech.
And to take a stand, to fight for justice.
TV Gaming says the average normie's ignorance is going to punish us all. I mean, as fucked up as that sounds, yeah, it is. But when you're thinking about running a campaign, that's what you got to think about. You got to think about, how am I going to get that undecided voter that's not like we in these spaces who care so much about these things. These are a big part of our identity, right? For the average person, it's not. You know, voting is literally only something they think about when election time comes up. Usually it's the last like month or so right before the election. That's when they start thinking about, oh shit, that's right. I got to vote for the president. Who am I going to vote for? I don't know. What is this person saying? What is that person saying? It's not a big core part of their identity like it is for us, right? So you have to think about that when you're running a campaign. How do I get those people to vote for me? And maybe it was part of the fact that she didn't have enough time to plan her campaign, or maybe it was just blatant ignorance. But that's the reason why we lost. They didn't say enough to appeal to the working class. That's why we lost.
To fight for themselves, to fight for others.
Exactly. The average American doesn't give a crap about anything until it directly affects them, but by then it's far too late. Yeah, pretty much.
So let their courage be our inspiration. Let their determination be our charge. And I'll close with this. There's an adage an historian once called a law of history, true of every society across the ages. The adage is, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time, but for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is.
Now things are about to get so much worse. We lived through Trump's time once, and people voted him out. They just have short-term memory. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service. HU. And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
Okay, so that's the speech. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting 4 years, and they really dropped the ball this time. But I think that is like the core issue here that I explained a moment ago, that they didn't do enough to appeal to the working class, and they didn't do enough to explain to the working class why the promises that Trump is making are not good for them. They think it's good for them now because on the surface, when you say something like, I want to eliminate income tax, the average voter looks at that and says, hey, that means more money in my pocket to provide for my family. But it doesn't work. Like his plan to replace income tax with tariffs, it doesn't work. And any benefit you would get from eliminating income tax and replacing it with tariffs, it's just going to be null and void by the fact that you're paying more for goods that are imported to this country. And as I said moments ago, a lot of people don't realize it, but the majority of the goods that we buy in this country are imported goods, and they're about to cost a whole lot more. So the Democrats have 4 years to learn from the mistakes of this election, and hopefully they do, because man, oh man, the next 4 years, it's about to be really fucking rough.